It's a conversation that's been happening for years, but man, does it ever seem like it's becoming omnipresent in the age of TikTok and other social media apps. I am, of course, talking about biphobia, and I want to start with the jokes, because whenever you see a situation where there's a marginalized community and jokes are being made at their expense, even by other marginalized people, and those original marginalized people being joked about are like, hey, we don't like these jokes, and then the response to them is, hey, it's a joke, just take it easy, laugh it off. It's usually a bad sign, right? We usually track this kind of pattern as bullying. At least that's my experience over the past 20 years. Anyway, if you've been on TikTok and you've looked up the word bisexual, you will no doubt see comedic videos like this.
I'm a bisexual and I'm dating...
You're what?
I'm dating a man.
Hey babe, what you watching?
Queer Ultimatum, you've probably never even heard of it.
Oh, I have actually. It's the same as the original version, except now we get to see more diversity in relationships.
Blah, 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 men talking, men talking.
All right, well, dinner will be ready in 15.
You didn't get it. As a bisexual woman dating a man, it's like really hard, you know? Like people see me and they don't know that I'm queer. To walk through life knowing that people don't know that I could be oppressed if I dated a woman is really complicated.
Julianne, you're so kind and you just know...
You know, it's not even just this. All of this feels like it got especially rolling when Caleb Heron made this particular joke a while back in the podcast with Brittany Broski.
I want to know the truth about bisexual women and why they are the way that they are. Where do they get off? What is their motive?
What train stop do they get off at?
My friends tell me to stop vilifying them, but they need to stop being the villain in my life. So yeah. Bye.
Not this very damaged young woman.
What the fuck is wrong with... Oh.
Well, here's the thing about bisexual women.
Go ahead and tell us. Go on, queen.
But go ahead. Hey, tell them.
Tell them, queen.
Bisexual women, I have the utmost respect for. I think them and their boyfriends... I think they're beautiful. I think their love is beautiful. I think bisexual women and their boyfriends, which they all have.
And their wolf cuts.
Yeah, I think... Oh.
So it's a stereotype, right? It's a stereotype of a particular bisexual woman, one that, frankly, as a person who's known many bisexual women, I'm not even that familiar with. Maybe it's just a New York thing, but like most of the bi women I know are not people who are always dating men, are people who don't look like, you know, the person with the wolf cut or whatever. But regardless, it's a stereotype. And I think a lot of people, including some bi women, at first take this kind of joke in stride. But the reason that it's gotten out of control is because really it was never that much of a joke in the first place. There are a lot of feelings behind these jokes, as is the case with every type of joke. And this is part of a larger conversation that's been going on in the queer community for a very long time about whether or not bi people are as oppressed as other queer folks. If you don't believe me, take a look at the comment sections. These comment sections kind of write themselves. So somebody asks, how come I never see this trope being applied to bi men dating women? Very valid question, because it is almost always, like look up bisexual, it is almost always jokes about bi women. And it's bi women and their boyfriends. You see that there's a lot of people in the comment section to the contrary are constantly not only hammering home the joke, but actually drawing from personal experience and personal grievances to actually make serious points about this epidemic of bi women. I've never met a bi person that wasn't like this. Okay, now make a parody video. Like Caleb Heron said, bi women and their boyfriends, LOL. They always act like they're being forced to date them. People don't know that I could be oppressed if I dated a woman. This is so accurate. So we're going to get into it. We're going to get into a lot of things. We're going to get into the statistics about the types of abuse and the types of discrimination that bi women face, oftentimes at higher rates, reportedly, than gay and lesbian folks. We're going to get into the conversation about what it means to be more oppressed, or how, you know, passing really works as some type of privilege versus some type of navigation of oppression. But really, I want you to just focus. Sorry that these are kind of cut off. I want you to just focus on how hard these people are going about bi people that they know in real life. It's just a skit, it's just a skit, it's just a skit. No one will call her a slur with the sad emoji. So one thing I've also noticed with this is that it's like usually white people. Is that just me? It's predominantly white people, not always white people. I know that this scales onto different queer communities of different backgrounds, but it's predominantly white people that are making these jokes, that feel comfortable making these jokes, that relay this kind of stereotype about bi people, which kind of like makes sense, because for me, as somebody who is part of a non-white family, I have firsthand experience hearing the kind of rhetoric that Latinos, Black people, Asian people who are straight have about bisexual people. It's the, oh, just pick a side. Oh, I understand being gay, but liking both, wow, you're just selfish. Wow, you're just lustful. You just can't date anybody, so you've opened up your dating pool to everybody. All that kind of conversation. There's an association with amorality or immorality with bisexuality. That does stand out as a specifically different point than homophobia. But for these folks who seem to be calculating that oppression is something based off of how visibly you are treated with discrimination, whether you're called a slur or not, which is very white people calculus of oppression. White people are never thinking about systemic oppression. They're never thinking about experiences that extend outside of their white communities, their personal lives. They're never thinking about different ways in which some type of marginalized background might be affected beyond just being called slurs or beyond just being seen a certain way. This kind of emphasis on that type of oppression misses a lot of what really homophobia is, much less biphobia, much less other forms of marginalization. And maybe that's because whiteness is a kind of shield against different forms of marginalization. You see that, for instance, brown people and Black people don't have the same conversations about bisexuality that white people do. And so white people at a higher proportion don't experience that kind of thing I just described, where, you know, a Latina mom is saying, just pick a side. They're not experiencing the kind of ostracization, the kind of, oh, you're just pretending to be straight or pretending to be gay. Oh, it's just a phase-ification of biphobia. Perhaps because white people are more often in parts of communities that are more sheltered, are more privileged. Perhaps because white people don't worry so much about what their family says because they don't have to, because they exist in these predominantly white societies with white supremacist systems. So if they don't like their own family, they can just go get another one a lot easier than your average working class brown or Black person can. Perhaps these are the overlaps that make white people not able to see it. But regardless, it gets to a point, right? Don't forget all the memes you have to share about wanting a girlfriend while having a boyfriend. And in this particular one, which is actually from a non-white creator, I found the comment section of this to be really instructive.
If you're a lesbian, do not make a joke about bisexuals and their boyfriends. But if you're a gay man, they might let it slide.
So I like that this is being said because as a bi man, it's easy for people to perhaps look at me participating in this conversation and say, you're not a woman. Why are you talking about women's issues like this? Why are you sticking your nose in lesbians' business? Fortunately, since you guys have been gassing up Caleb Heron and men like that guy in the skit who are participating in the making fun of bi women, it is now a lot easier for me to say, you've got men involved in it from the beginning. Might as well waltz in and argue the other side. Regardless, maybe this point is being made in good faith. It's probably true that men, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, are more coddled or taken with more friendliness than women who express that, especially when lesbians can be disproportionately painted as aggressive or as mean. But again, take a look at the comments here. So first somebody says, genuinely, and I mean this with no malice in my heart, I'm a lesbian. I cannot think about a joke about bisexuals and their boyfriends that isn't biphobic. I would love an example and I'll delete my damn comments so people don't get all hurt in the replies. Look at this first response. Saying something factual isn't biphobia, I fear. They just get butthurt about it when you point it out. Again, like, is this rhetoric does it not smell to y'all? Do you guys not get that whiff of, for instance, oh, making these jokes about gay people? It's not based off of falsehoods. It's based on facts. You just get butthurt about it. Using the term butthurt, which is arguably a homophobic pejorative, right, to describe bi women. The irony just writes itself. Using the same kind of rhetoric straight people often use about gay people, white people often use about Black people, cis people often use about trans people, of, well, it's based off of facts, so don't get butthurt, to justify a joke. Well, you're proving Remy's point. They can't stop all of us. It's because they want to be us so bad, LOL. I don't know who this cast person is. Pretty white to me. My thesis continues to hold up, okay? A Black person points out the joke is never the issue. The buck fucking wild comments that follow and go unchecked are. And then the creator never calls out the insane comments. Men raping, murdering, and oppressing women for centuries is not comparable to lesbians being mean on the internet. You know that, right? You know that there's a lot of misogynistic lesbians, though, that uphold, and women who are misogynistic who uphold systems of patriarchy, right? Just pointing that out. In another life, I'm a bisexual woman who says her cishet boyfriend is spiritually lesbian. I don't even know how this became a joke about bi women. The last that I checked, I saw straight women making the joke about their boyfriends being spiritually lesbian. I don't remember that being something that happened within the bi community. But again, clearly I'm not having the personal experiences that these people are having, which justify apparently them making these sweeping judgments. This one really stuck out to me. No, because if I get left for a man, I'll be on the news. So we're just threatening violence against bi women. We're just threatening like to commit homicide against bi women. Is that what we're doing? This is one of those things that it's like pink pill adjacent content, because you could say anything under the guise of hating on men and people will just act like it's like revolutionary. They'll act like it's praxis, even though what you're saying is still upholding systems of oppression, including patriarchy. But because it's about how much you hate men, well, then it's okay. Lesbian boyfriend says, to be fair, oh, well, good username. To be fair, I feel like they're targeting that toward the man in that scenario. Again, I mean, even if that is the case, you're still saying I'm going to commit an act of violence if my bi girlfriend leaves me for a man. That's a threat. That's a violent threat. Even if the woman is not the one who suffers the violence, which there's nothing really indicating that that's the case, to be fair. Even if that were the case, if my girlfriend leaves me for another man, I'm going on the news because I'm killing him. That's a threat against your girlfriend. You understand that, right? That you're putting her under a physical threat, that you will commit an act of violence against someone that she cares about, that she knows, etc. And this is not even just cheating either. This is leaving me for a man. You know, I thought we believed in liberation. You know, I thought we believed people could choose who they wanted to date. Tegan Young, I say this all the time. Some people need to get off TikTok and put their half-baked thoughts in a journal instead of on the internet. I think there's something to that, because the reality is sometimes you use your personal grievances and your personal experiences, that's my first point, right, as essentially justification for anything, essentially equivalent to an ethnography. Well, in my experience, I know 4 bi women, and all of them, to me, seem like they're male-centered. So bi women are male-centered. And again, like, especially when that comes from white people in privileged backgrounds, you just have to laugh. Because imagine saying that to a bi woman living in Africa, a bi woman living in an inner city neighborhood that is underprivileged, that is underserved, a bi woman living on a reservation. Imagine saying that kind of thing about bi women there. Imagine telling those bi women, oh, you don't suffer from biphobia. You actually suffer from less oppression because you're bi and not lesbian. And as a matter of fact, you actually oppress women. Because I know bi women and they leave their girlfriends for men. Very strange behavior. Very bizarre behavior. And again, very white behavior. And as Connie Cody says, and then they hit you with the chill, it's just a joke. It's a very clever maneuvering where you can never have to take accountability for anything. This one's particularly ironic. They villainize the hell out of you for having preferences and boundaries. I mean, this is a conversation being held by, I guess, a bunch of lesbians online that is predominantly talking about bi women who have male preferences, or bi-curious women who are preferring men, as if they are this dirge on the community who are half oppressed, who are selling women out. And then they want to claim that they're being targeted because they have preferences and boundaries. Now, again, this makes sense if it's like someone hurt you, right? Some girl you know that you dated, she didn't like that you eventually felt uncomfortable with her being bisexual. Or some girl you know that you're friends with or that you interacted with thinks it's bad that you as a lesbian only want to date other lesbians. Frankly, I know a lot of bi women, Doechii among them, right, who said this publicly, who are like, I only date bi, right? So it's very clear empirically that that doesn't represent the entirety of bi women. But because you know women in your personal life who have potentially said hurtful things, oppressive things towards you, who've leveraged oppression towards you in the worst case scenario, that means bi women and their boyfriends, bi women and their boyfriends, bi women and their boyfriends. And then you always have this comment, right? As a bisexual, the jokes are funny as hell because I'm not insecure. As if that never happens in situations where a group is being made fun of, that a member of that group goes, well, I'm not insecure. You guys are actually just funny, right? Right? You guys like me, right? Like, I'm cool. I'm one of the good ones, right? So all the classic dynamics are set up. But we talk about this not just because there's a joke that's being made based on an unfair stereotype that should be addressed. We talk about this today because we have to then re-highlight over and over again the ways in which biphobia is its specific own thing, that it's not just watered down homophobia or homophobia that you only experience when you're being perceived as gay, but it is a system, a structure of oppression, of queerphobia, that has both material and quiet, you might say, or systematic outcomes that disproportionately negatively affect bi women. I say this about bi women as a bi man, but I also know that these kinds of things affect bi men too. And there are specific forms of biphobia that affect bi men. Again, the things I said earlier about hearing relatives, hearing people talk about bisexuality as if it's a fake thing, as if it's attention-seeking behavior, as if it's promiscuity, all this kind of stuff. But also the ways in which bi men are stigmatized as being gay men in disguise, gay men in denial, as having that sugar in them. The whole conversation about DL, which of course got turned into this appropriated conversation by white communities. But because bi women are women, they're easier targets. They're easier targets because people love making fun of women. They do, including other women. If you can push the negative subject, the evil force, as a particular woman, even if the woman is made up, a fictional idea of a bi woman, it creates a valve for you to relieve the kind of pressure that you face from misogyny. It's just easier to make fun of women. Making fun of bi men and their girlfriends, that doesn't really work as well. And there's also different structural gender roles that play into that. For instance, a bi woman can be, for instance, not condemned as readily because, well, she's just curious. Well, as long as she knows where home is, as long as she takes care of the kids, she's essentially a straight girl but confused, whatever. Bi men can be more likely to face types of violence and ostracization based off of the fact that they're construed as, emasculated, as overly feminized, etc. So there's ways in which the patriarchy can particularly be nasty towards bi men. Regardless, the misogyny that bi women face is its own unique dynamic that makes this issue in its own way worse for them. And this is how oppression works, right? Again, this conversation about, well, some people are more oppressed than others is a messy one. And in particular, this skit talking about, oh, how will they know that I'm oppressed? People don't even know that I'm oppressed. It just doesn't work that way. You can be oppressed even if you are bi and completely in the closet. Let's get to some statistics. So this is an article from 2016 from bi.org about biphobia, about whether or not biphobia is watered down homophobia and bi people have it slightly easier because they can pass as straight if they want to. This is 2016, right? And the conversation dates back to well before that in queer communities. Bisexual women and sexual violence. According to the 2010 National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, 46% of individuals that identify as bisexual women report being rape survivors, followed by 17% of heterosexual women and 13% of lesbians. 75% of bisexual women in the United States report experiencing some other type of sexual violence. This disproportionate impact is found even when controlling for other predictors. These staggering rates of victimization suggest that the overlaying identities of gender and sexual orientation put this group at high risk of experiencing sexual violence. So, statistics proving that bisexual women disproportionately facing sexual violence, even when compared to lesbians, right? So if we're going to have the conversation about some people being oppressed, I think especially when it comes to white people, the idea of how it looks in your head to be oppressed and not being able to picture bi people facing that, bi women facing that, is more important than looking at actual statistics and ethnographies of bi women and seeing the disproportionate impact that they receive. Because if you were going to argue that some people are more oppressed than others, sure, you could use actual statistics to say bi women are the most oppressed among, the conversation of monosexuals versus bi plus people. You could argue that. You shouldn't, probably, because that is not a conversation worth having. It's oppression Olympics. It's reductive, and it misses the different particular ways in which, for instance, lesbians and gay men are affected by homophobia, lesbophobia, right? And this is not something that is just in the past, just from the 2010s, an old conversation, right? It still applies. This is from Diva magazine. Crime survey for England and Wales shows these harrowing trends. Just 4.5% of cishet people have experienced domestic abuse compared to 6% of lesbian and gay people and more than 9% of bi plus people. And then there are conversations about, whether lesbians are less likely to experience domestic abuse compared to straight women. Is that actually reflective of you being less oppressed than straight women? No. It's a statistic. It's a statistic that draws from real situations. Plus, there's conversations about underreporting that have to be mentioned when you come into these conversations, right? This article also reports that biphobic attitudes elevate risk. The idea that bi plus identities are not valid leaves bi plus women at risk of being targeted, as does the stereotype that bi plus people are always sexually available regardless of consent. So again, it's not just comments, right? Comments that apparently these white queer folks close their eyes, close their ears, and never hear. It's not just comments of, oh, bi women are more promiscuous, bi women are just confused, bi women are just down for anything. That obviously actually manifests into real world abuse. Because if people know that you're bi, they can more likely push you, especially straight people can push you in specific directions that you don't want to go in. It can become that lever through which you face a lot of specific types of abuse. Do you want more empirical evidence? Do you want more statistics? Health disparities among bisexual people. Transgender people and people of color comprise large portions of the bisexual community, with more than 40% of LGBT people of color identifying as bisexual, and about half of transgender people describing their sexual orientation as bisexual or queer. That's another overlay. So you're talking about bi women. Okay, you've pictured in your head a white woman with a wolf cut and a nose piercing who has a boyfriend, but sometimes complains that she's not given enough love by lesbians. Sure, maybe that woman exists, maybe she doesn't. How is that your picture in your head of a bi woman and not a trans woman, a black woman, a brown woman, a black trans woman, a non-binary woman, a gender fluid woman who is bisexual? All types of different categories of bi women, but you only picture this particular type of woman. Again, I wonder why. Negative experiences in healthcare settings can lead bisexual people to delay healthcare visits, change healthcare providers, avoid disclosing their sexuality and subsequent interactions with providers, and rely on internet sources rather than a doctor for health information. So a recent survey of bisexuals in the UK found that only 33% of respondents felt comfortable telling their general practitioner about their sexual orientation, and nearly half had experienced biphobia when accessing health services. Again, we're comparing with gay men and lesbians, significantly higher for bisexual people. Is that just because they're so confused? That's what these stereotypes and these jokes lend to, right? Is it gives you this lens through which to see these empirical statistics showing disproportionate negative effects towards bi people and registering that as, well, you know how those people are. You're not thinking about, what kind of systemic disadvantages and oppressions they face, because you saw on TikTok and on Tumblr and on Twitter that these people are actually less oppressed than gay and lesbians, that they use their potential oppression as a masquerade, that they're confused, that they mistreat women because they're so indecisive, because they're male-centered, etc. So then when it comes time for you to evaluate that evidence, you have that bias that makes you say, something's got to be going on there with how the bi people are moving. The bi women must just be, underreporting because they're such head cases. They're so confused. They're so messed up in the head. So they don't get along with anybody. Bi people are so messy, so messy. So again, Caleb Heeran, all you other men participating alongside, these lesbian women joking about bi women, this is the kind of environment you're contributing to. And I love this idea of also the performative queerness, because as we've said, there are systemic forms of oppression that you face. Let's say you are a bi woman and you're not out of the closet to most of the people that you interact with. Some people will dismiss this as straight passing. You're straight passing. That's what that joke, that skit was about, right? How will they know that I'm oppressed because I have a boyfriend? Well, even if those bi women think that they're not oppressed, think that they don't face as much oppression, think that people don't know that they're oppressed because they're bi, the analysis we've done of social systems and the statistics that we've looked at prove that those bi women are actually internalizing biphobia. Because if you're a bi person who's not out of the closet, you still have to navigate a world wherein your identity, the things you're attracted to, the people you're attracted to, is marginalized. And you don't have community with that many people about it. You have to hide it from people. And there's a really good paper about this that I want to show you. I was reading it before the stream that engages with this conversation. The paper is called Deconstructing the Clinging Myth of Straight Passing Privilege for Bi Plus People by Rosie Nelson. It's one of multiple examples of studies of bisexuality and passing. Now, the conversation about passing is really fascinating, especially when you hear it from white queers. For one, it is copy-pasted from the racial conversation, and we'll get to that in a moment. But for one, it's based on this idea that if something is not clearly visible, then it's not really oppression, which couldn't be farther from the truth. If we know that oppression is something that happens quietly, it happens tacitly, it happens systemically, then there's no reason for us to think that just because a bi person identifies as straight, literally everywhere potentially, if that's the case, that they're not experiencing forms of oppression. But more importantly, it calcifies and shrinks the idea of passing as something that is exclusively done for privilege, exclusively done to wield power over other people. Now, if we were to have a serious, thoughtful, critical conversation about bi people, especially bi people in positions of power, we could have then a conversation about ways that bi people might use passing, if that's what you want to call it, as a tool to gain power over other people. Or at the very least, can receive privileges of consideration over other people. One example might be bi women maybe disproportionately accepting and getting support for roles playing lesbians in movies. Messy conversation in and of itself. And I don't know the statistics of that. It might not be the truth. But if you were, for instance, to be able to prove that in Hollywood, most of the roles that are supposed to be for lesbian characters are taken up by bi women actors, you could make a conversation that those bi women are using their position, using their passing, using their particular queerness to disproportionately affect lesbians because their representation on screen, their potential for work is being undermined by folks who are in a different category of queerness who can pass as that without having to be that. Not so different from a conversation about, straight men, cishet men playing trans folks in movies instead of actual trans folks or, disabled folks, right? So that's an example. But more often than not, a bi person passing is doing so because they're trying to avoid harm. Why would they be passing in the first place? Is it just to get street cred on TikTok? This is why social media fucks up so much discourse. Because you see the likes and you see the comments and you see the different ways that people use identity markers for social currency, which does happen to some degree. And you think that that's reflective of real life. Like, these categories of marginalization are actually just markers of social currency. And so the only reason why somebody would want to be a part of those communities is because they want to get that social capital. Whereas in reality, for instance, as a bi man, I'm not going to tell most people that I'm bi because I don't want to get beat up, because I don't want to get kicked out of my family, because I don't want to get ostracized by close friends and family members. Well, not friends, but close family members, etc. Also, this article talks about a concept called the declaration imperative. The declaration imperative. So coming out of the closet is one thing. A lot of subjectivity about what it means to come out of the closet. But a declaration imperative is this pressure to constantly announce what your sexuality is. And this is not something that only happens to bi people, right? Because if you think about it, gay people can be just as straight passing as bi people can. Because what does it mean to be passing as gay, passing as queer, or passing as straight? There are plenty of gay men who can detail you their experiences of dressing a specific way, walking a specific way, changing the way that they talk in specific spaces in order to pass as straight. I remember seeing a TikTok about a gay waiter, who did that. So this whole concept is fraught. And I think it's covered well in this essay. If you go to page 16, for instance, to the conclusion about passing not being a privilege, it is correct that bi plus people may be able to pass as straight in certain circumstances, as may many lesbian and gay people. But the understanding of this as a privilege fails to account for the difficulties that anyone living outside of a heterosexual norm experiences. Bi plus people are often hampered by a lack of recognition around bi plus identities, a lack of visibility, and an inability to represent their identities in public spaces. Consequently, what is considered straight passing privilege may be reframed as a reasonable concern for safety and a lack of awareness and nuance on the part of the viewer. And this is what happens, my second point about white people, when white folks copy and paste racial concepts onto other forms of oppression. There's so much to unpack here, right? Because this concept of straight passing doesn't emerge, especially with that language, if you don't first have the concept of white passing. This is what happens when white people hear about concepts among black folks to describe racial discrimination and are like, okay, so that must be what's happening to me. And yes, like when we have the conversation about like Asian folks and H-Mart discourse and all that, there's a lot that you can learn from black solidarity movements, from race theory, critical race theory, etc., pioneered by black folks to discuss black liberation, anti-black discrimination, etc. But that doesn't mean it maps onto everything one-to-one. So that in the case of white passing for black folks being a privilege, well then straight passing is a privilege among queer folks. That doesn't make sense for multiple reasons. Firstly being that white passing historically has not been always regarded as a privilege. That is a complicated conversation that actually originates with white passing being a conversation about a black person equally oppressed on behalf of their blackness, but because of their white passingness, using that as a way to navigate white spaces and avoid being assaulted, lynched, thrown in jail, etc. Avoid forms of discrimination. That's not a privilege. That's not white passing black people avoiding oppression. That's white passing black people defending themselves any way that they can, surviving oppression. So even in that case, historically, you'd be wrong if you thought that white passing is strictly an avoidance of oppression. It wouldn't make sense for a white passing black person to be like, but how will people know that I'm black, right? The white passing black person historically has been like, I gotta hide it from certain people so that I can survive, or so that I can figure out a way for me and my family. With time, especially, though not always over time, there are certain situations in which comprador black folks, black bourgeoisie, can create these systems of privilege through which white passing people can maintain dominion over non-white passing black people. So you have a Zendaya who is mixed race, biracial, and on behalf of, her having lighter skin and being mixed, she might be presented more opportunities in Hollywood than a monoracial black American person, for instance. And this all can kind of get brushed under the rug, swept under the rug, because they're all black, right? These are subtle ways in which people with lighter skin, which is a phenotypical dynamic, can wield their position in a hierarchy as power over others. In those cases, yes, similar to the theoretical case I made up of bi women taking positions from lesbians in Hollywood, for instance. In those theoretical cases, yes, you can talk about passing as a privilege. Again, there are critical conversations to be had about that. But to just refer to straight passing offhandedly, as if it's, for one, this unique thing that bi people do, it's not. And for two, as if it's this monolithic, easy way to avoid oppression and to just say you're oppressed on and off when it benefits you, even in cases where that might be more true than others, is still completely overlooking the fact that those people are oppressed. But again, for white folks especially, not looking like you're oppressed is equivalent to not being oppressed. That's why they look at black people in certain positions of middle class lifestyle and say, well, you're not discriminated against. That's why they don't count microaggressions as racism historically. That's why they don't look at neo-colonial situations as colonial, even though they clearly are. Because it doesn't look like obvious racism. It doesn't look like obvious white supremacy. That's why white people are like this. And that's why, again, white queers have racism envy. That's the term I'm going to use, straightforward. White queers have racism envy. They think in their heads that the kind of social currency you get from being obviously discriminated against is something that could be wanted, desired, sought after in any serious way, which in itself is racist, is anti-black. The idea that not only your being straight passing is something that maps on to exactly what being white passing is, but also that this is some sort of crime against the marginalized community and some sort of indication of your having special powers over other people. I mean, that's just queerphobic, and based off of how you read that, it's racist. Again, oppression consists of so many different things that are not obviously visible, especially because visibility is subjective. To white people, most things are not visible. They figure shit out 5 years after people talk about it. It took them until 2020 to be like, dang, I didn't realize how bad anti-blackness was in this country. I thought when we voted for Obama, we fixed that. White people are not typically the people you want to go to point out what's visible or what's not. And so it's so funny that they would also be the arbiters of something being valid or not based on its visibility. It's like, bro, you can see only 10% of the oppression going on because you choose to only see that. And then simultaneously, you choose to only believe that the things that you can see are the things that are real. It's this very perverse bastardization of rationalism, And I do think it's an America-centric discourse and a Western-centric discourse, Tegan. Because, again, if you're bisexual in the global south, in sub-Saharan Africa or North Africa, if you're bisexual in Tanzania, if you're bisexual in Mexico, if you're bisexual in Indonesia, you're not exactly avoiding oppression in any tangible way. You see it much more clearly just how much there is discrimination against you. Morg Parfington, seeing charitable organizations offer to help visible minorities only kind of grates against my soul. White people, because they recognize that they have to concede things, because they recognize, wielding power over other people is bad generally, they have to negotiate every single thing, every single form of oppression, because they're basically litigating it. Because if it's oppression, then they have to pay up, right? If it's oppression, then they have to concede something to it. That's what's so funny. That's what's so funny about, white people commandeering these discourses. And yeah, white queer people have this very common white tendency of being unable to imagine and experience outside of the white people they know, the American Western people they know, the culture that they know. And there's no part of these white queer folks asking, what about, my Mexican neighbors? What do they think about bisexuality? you know, what about the Mexican bi girls I went to school with, and the Indian bi girls and the black bi girls I went to school with? How might they differ from the bi women that I am inevitably running into on dating apps? It's so dating centric too. A lot of these conversations are so dating centric. I know that that's an ironic critique when you're having a conversation about queerness. But again, queerness is not just about dating, right? Queerness is not just about who you choose to love or who you choose to be in a relationship with. Queerness is about what you experience and what you're forced to relay, or what you choose to relay based off of what you experience. So a person might be gay, but they might be completely in the closet. They might be in a straight relationship, married to a woman, successful, well-to-do, and they're still experiencing oppression. and it seems like people knew that when it came to like white gay men, for instance. But when it comes to the bi woman, oh, well, she's like clearly just making shit up. Isn't that really interesting how that works? So I was not the first person to talk about this on TikTok. There are multiple creators, usually creators of color, can't imagine why, who are pointing out this nonsense.
I don't take bisexual discourse seriously, especially when it's coming from a lesbian who just got their heart done dirt by a bisexual. Like, you're speaking out of heartbreak. You're not speaking out of this, like, hate for the patriarchy that you think you are. Oh, they only censor men, or oh, they do this, or oh, blah, blah, blah. This is the reason why I can't talk to any bisexuals. There are bisexuals who completely live their life in their queer identity. Because it's one thing to, like, identify as a queer person. It's another thing to live, like, a queer life. Like, not only is it visible, but you uphold queer spaces. You exist within queer spaces. You protect queer spaces and queer people. And not only that, you are informed and you are an ally to the rest of your community. There are plenty of bisexuals who live that reality. So to get online all the time and hear blah, 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 bisexuals this, bisexuals that, I don't want to hear nothing from a bisexual. They just pander to men. They're always going to pick a man every time. You just got your heart broke. Get the fuck off the internet. Like, what are you doing? You're literally only furthering harmful discourse within the community, creating rifts within the community publicly at that. Because what? Some girl did you dirt? The number of studs that I have run into who will put their male friends over other women because they want to be accepted by men first and foremost. But y'all don't see people getting on here yapping about that every Pride Month, because at the end of the day, these studs are not going back and sleeping with men. At the end of the day, y'all are still misogynistic towards bisexual women because you devalue them the same way that men devalue them when they learn that they sleep with men. Like, it's really crazy.
I love the point too about male-centered being something that's not exclusive to bi women. Like, it's just, even in the cases of these, dastardly bi women who break your heart, that make you go online and post about them and post about bi women being XYZ, right? Which is, again, it's the same energy as like, all girls are fake. You know what I mean? It's the same energy as a guy going on Facebook or on whatever social media app and being like, women only care about you being tall and being good at sports and having money. That's it. That's all women care about. We all look at that and say, okay, who did you dirty? Like, who hurt you? What pain are you experiencing? Because we all know a bunch of short guys that don't have a lot of money that are very comfortable, very happy in their heterosexual dating lives. But it's you who has the revelation, the sociological analysis that everybody has to pay attention to. Not because you read something, not because you studied something for several years, not because you consulted so many people, but because you and a couple of your friends got their feelings hurt. Because you and a couple of your friends are experiencing some forms of marginalization or some forms of a lack of consideration. And you've evolved that into, let's place hate on a group of women. That's it. That's what it is. But moreover, it's not only bi women dating men who are male-centered, quote unquote. If we're talking about male-centered, we could talk about lesbian women who only hang out with men, who respect a lot of parts of patriarchy and see themselves as participating in it, but just being a woman. That exists. We know that exists. But that doesn't mean we get the right to make commentary about lesbian women being male-centered, because we can obviously see that there are axes of oppression that overlap with that. The bi woman is just this perfect scapegoat. She's apparently straight to anybody who has beef with her. Any queer person can see her as apparently straight. Any straight person can see her as apparently gay. Both of them can see her as not being able to choose a side, as preferring one over the other, whether she does or doesn't. The bi woman is an easy scapegoat because the bi woman is something that lives in your head. She's not a real person. She's not somebody who has a real lived experience. She doesn't have family members who have opinions about sexuality. She hasn't had to go to an out center. She hasn't experienced abuse. She hasn't experienced violence. She hasn't experienced negative health outcomes. She hasn't been denied coverage by a doctor or given poor health advice because she revealed that she dates women. That bi woman, all she does is talk about men and have a wolf cut and complain that people don't see her as oppressed because she's not real. She's not a real human being. Manic Candace Posting says, male-centered is also like not raising issues in a workplace presented mainly by men, or to capitulate power imbalances and misconduct from men at an employer. This isn't discussed enough. A lot of people are male-centered in that way. Another really good TikTok that I wanted to discuss was this one by Elvuds Deer. I'm really bad at reading French.
The way in which we talk about bisexual women in general, but like especially like during Pride, is like quite bothersome and kind of problematic. There are two ways usually that people talk about bi women. One, in the sense that they are like predators. And the second way is always about their boyfriends. Bi women and their straight boyfriends. Bi women and their boyfriends. I want to talk about the first point. One, I think it is very strange how like in certain like online discourse, it's like pretty normalized to just call bisexual women like predators, like towards a lesbian. Not because I'm not saying that anyone hasn't been personally victimized by a bisexual woman, but in the sense that like calling a bisexual or like just a queer person in general a predator based off of their sexuality is like queerphobic, right?
Like, I can't imagine how people wouldn't be able to see that. Like, you have these accusations, right? If we go backward.
I don't like when people talk about how bisexual women only have boyfriends because it's just like not true. Like, I know so many bisexual women with husbands.
Very, very funny. It's just constant comment sections talking about bi women, you know, comments like, you know, they want to be bi women so bad. Comments like they villainize you. Comments like, oh, you guys are acting like the men that are out here pillaging and dominating and sexualizing and murdering and oppressing women for centuries. Not comparable to lesbians being mean on the internet, right? You're constantly just like undermining the jokes that you know have negative effects on marginalized people because you don't care to listen to people say, hey, this bothers me. And it's just a very bizarre dynamic to play out. Sometimes the jokes can be funny. If you find a joke funny, that's your subjective experience. And if you understand that a person is being lighthearted, yeah, on occasion you can find yourself laughing at the jokes. Lesbian boyfriend is asking about this, right? But that's not the same thing as posting these jokes online and then upvoting frequent comments, just constantly making fun of this particular stereotype of bi women. Let's get back to this particular TikTok because I think it was really helpful.
That is like at the root of a lot of biphobia is this idea that they are deceptive predators. I'm talking specifically because I saw this one comment under a video where someone was talking about how much bisexual women like are so annoying. And someone mentioned that like bi women are victims of men, but predators towards like lesbians and other queer women. And it's very like confusing and strange to me. Like this idea that like a bisexual woman only ever can exist as a victim or a predator and not just as like a normal person who's experiencing normal attraction. And this kind of feeds to the second point, but there's this idea that like every relationship that a bi woman has with a man is in some way like invalid. Either in the sense that he's manipulating her and she's too blinded by her own insecurity to see it, or in the sense that like she is dating this man because she doesn't really like women. As if the reason why women who say they're bisexual date men more often than they date women is because they don't actually really care about like lesbians or like dating women in general. They just like want an into the queer community. Because if you talk to any bisexual woman for a prolonged period of time, you will find that the reason why it took them so long to identify as bisexual was because they felt the same way. Because they felt as if they were just trying to intrude into a community that they have no place in being in. It's like this idea that bisexual women who like are in relationships with men do not have like experiences that meaningfully differ from straight women's, apart from the fact that they're dating men while saying they're bisexual, so they're just doing it to be annoying.
Yeah, this is about to be a really good point too. And again, this construence of any particular type of queer folks as being some type of predator, I mean, that should be like an instant red flag. It should be very obvious that that has extremely troubling parallels with narratives about queer people that have existed for a very long time. Oh, these bewitching bisexuals, you know, these predatory bisexuals. But like, I want to pay attention to this point in particular too.
Like, dating a man as a bisexual woman is a completely different kind of landscape. And if you talk to any bi woman who thought she was straight for a significant amount of time and then realized she was bisexual, like, even if she's still dating men, which, like, I wouldn't be surprised if she is because she's bisexual and not a lesbian, you will find that, like, after realizing that she's bisexual, she just cannot interact with men in the same way. Like, bisexual women are more likely to be abused than like straight or lesbian counterparts. And I saw someone talking about, it was the same person who I was mentioning earlier.
Before we get to that next point, again, because oppression is not just something that manifests in very obvious, very visible ways. You're a girl dating a girl, that's bad, we throw rocks at you, right? Because oppression is something that has to do with your relationships with other people, the resources that you're able to get, the feelings you have about yourself, your relationship with healthcare, etc., then dating a man or dating only men so far, or only men in your life as a bi woman, is still not the same thing as being a straight woman dating men. It still does not lead to the same experiences. There are many times when a relationship that you have that appears heterosexual to the outside world has several queer dynamics within it. Because, for instance, you might not know what the sexual orientation or gender experience of the man or the presumed man in a heterosexual relationship is.
Talking about how bi women, the reason why they're abused more by than like straight or lesbian women is because they date men. Like, because they're dating men, that's why they're being abused. And then she went on to say that if bisexual women want to stop being abused, they should just stop dating men, which is like genuinely so like disgusting to say.
That's a conversation that actually happens. Again, because this sort of male-centered, anti-male-centered discourse can be so popular on social media. And it can be all about these people who only live in your head, all based off of this idea that we're being liberatory because we're dunking on men. Then it leads you to bringing conclusions like, well, dating a man is stupid. So if you're dating a man and he does something bad to you, well, obviously you have some culpability in that, because why are you dating men? Especially if you're a bi woman. Maybe your internalized homophobia is what led you to get abused. These kinds of conversations are nonsensical. They presume that patriarchal violence and gendered violence can only be perpetuated by men. But more importantly, again, they consistently invalidate the experiences of women whilst claiming to be pro-woman. It's mind-boggling.
Because it places like the blame on women for their abuse. It would be similar to telling a straight trans woman that if she wants to be abused less, that she shouldn't date men, right? Or like telling like a gay man that if he doesn't want to face homophobia and like abuse from like closeted DL men, that he should just be straight or something. There's this idea that there's choice in who bisexual people date. But the thing is that there's only so much choice insofar as you're picking out of who you like. You cannot help who you like. I would think people would understand this. And the reason why bisexual women end up being like at higher rates of abuse than straight women or lesbians is because of the fact that they are experiencing biphobia. There's this idea that bisexual women aren't like really oppressed, and that's why they don't deserve any space in the queer community. That's why they take up too much space in the queer community, because they're not actually oppressed. Apart from the fact that I think that that's just a generally kind of flawed way to look at things. But it's also very frustrating that like when you decide to like go along with that line of reasoning and you bring up the specific ways in which bisexual women are oppressed more, and then you just get blamed for like your people's own oppression. And for bi women who aren't abused by the men that they date, who are out and comfortably out with their boyfriends, those relationships operate differently from heterosexual relationships. One, a lot of bi women date bi men. And oftentimes, bi women and bi men realize that they are bisexual by dating each other.
This is a really important point. Again, that speaks to queerness being something aside from phenotype or aside from strictly visible forms of racism, forms of bullying, forms of prejudice, etc. I recognize my own queerness in part through dating queer women, because I would have conversations with them about queerness to begin with. It starts sometimes with being like, yeah, I'm straight, but, you know, I'm open-minded. I obviously have nothing against queer people, and I'm open to learning more about it, which is the space that you usually start in when you realize that you're queer, right? And so oftentimes the situation will be for a man in those relationships that over time, the more that they learn, they open themselves up to it, the more that they relate, and the more things that they learn about sexuality, the more intersections that they recognize they have with queerness. Also, attraction, even when they are in, opposite gender relationships, or however you might construe that, attraction changes to the point about how bi women often date bi men. I always noticed that the vast majority of women that I came across that were attracted to me were queer. Learning that I was queer as well, I realized that the vast majority of women that I was attracted to were queer women, right? That's not to say that I'm only attracted to women, but it is to say that a lot of my attraction to women is still colored by a lens of queerness. Does that make sense? The idea, again, like, well, because that's not obviously gay, you don't experience any type of queer phobia. Doesn't make sense, because I have experienced queer phobia. Oftentimes in spaces where it's had nothing to do with me dating. Just the way that I looked, the way that I presented, before I recognized my own queerness, before when I passed or whatever. I experienced forms of queer phobia that led to me being physically assaulted, that led to me being sexually harassed or whatever. So these kinds of things do matter. And again, it's not as if bi women are trying to intrude into spaces and be like, we are the most oppressed. It's y'all that create that controversy, that dynamic, as if there's some competition for space, when all that people are actually asking for is solidarity. Narita Zaraki, the strong ally to queer pipeline, if you will. SSS Serpentina, my first longtime partner, realized he was bisexual when we were dating in college. Damn, you have women attracted to you? Must be nice. All right. So, in conclusion, do not let white and Western people's construences of sexuality and of queerness dominate what you learn about queerness. Do the reading, do the real research, do the real thinking and conversations, and recognize that just like how you've learned with every other form of oppression, sometimes it's the jokes, sometimes it's the offhanded comments and the dismissiveness that builds the culture of intolerance, that builds the culture of hate. We know that this is the case, and yet we fall for it time and time again. And in the case of bi women, especially on behalf of their being women, they're just the recent easy target for it. And I think, especially those of us who are queer men, we have a responsibility to stick up for bi women in this. For those of us who have instead been making the obvious joke and then allowing our comment sections to fester into support groups for people who hate bi women, that shit cannot be permissible anymore. We need solidarity across queer people in the United States and outside of the United States especially. We need solidarity for queer people that understands that these experiences are not the end-all be-all of what sexuality is. These experiences that we have with some girl with a wolf cut that we know should not be the lens through which we understand queerness. Studying queerness should be the lens through which we understand queerness. And yes, our personal experiences can often be the drivers for us to do that research. They can often be valuable anecdotes that help us solidify opinions that we make based off of evidence and based off of real analysis. But it cannot be this constant, again and again, well, I know a bi girl who's like this. Every bi girl I know is like this, etc. That's more embarrassing for you than it is for the bi people you're making fun of. The idea that of all the queer people in the world, of all the bi people in the world, all the bi women in the world, the only ones you know and talk about are the girls that are made fun of on TikTok, reflects that you are extremely sheltered and that you are in a bubble of your own making, because you have the resources available to you to learn more. You have the resources available to care more, and you just don't use them.